You're in the Andes, in Peru. Elevation, 10,332 feet. Two rivers meet right here, and when the waters join at just the right speed, the ground beneath your feet begins to vibrate. It's not an earthquake, it's not the wind, it's the rock itself pulsing, as if something underneath is breathing. In front of you, there's an entrance, narrow, dark, and low enough to force you to bow your head. You can't see what's inside, and yet someone walked in here 2,500 years ago with a torch. No map, no marked exit, while the ground never stopped trembling with every step they took. Welcome, explorer. Today we're diving into 6 places that challenge everything we know about the past. 6 sacred temples that hide secrets nobody wants to reveal. Temples carved into mountains, underground chambers, ancient observatories, and structures so old and so precise that modern science still refuses to give a definitive answer on how they were built. I'm Curious Chris, and our expedition through the ancient mysteries of the past is starting right now. CHAVÍN de HUÁNTAR. From the outside, the temple of CHAVÍN de HUÁNTAR is already breathtaking. There are stone platforms, sunken plazas, and carved panels covered in figures with jaguar fangs, serpent hair, and claws pointed straight at you. But the real structure lies beneath all of that. Under the platform sits a 3-story labyrinth with 36 corridors and chambers connected by staircases and ramps. The ceiling in some sections is only 6 feet high. You have to crouch to keep moving. In others, it suddenly opens up to 15 feet, and you feel exposed and small. That difference was no accident. It was calculated. Archaeologist John Rick of Stanford University has been leading excavations at the site since 1994 and confirmed it. Every shift in space was built to shift exactly what you feel. Inside the labyrinth, Rick's team found 35 trumpets made from marine shells called pututus. When played simultaneously inside the corridors, they produce a roar that travels through the entire structure and arrives everywhere at once. You can't figure out where the sound is coming from. It has no direction, no source. Ethnomusicologist Miriam Kolar began studying the site's acoustics in 2008 and published her findings in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America in 2012. What she measured made engineers uncomfortable. Sound inside the labyrinth doesn't behave the way it should. It circulates, reflects, and multiplies in a way that makes it impossible to locate its origin. In complete darkness, with that roar coming from everywhere and nowhere, your brain starts losing the reference points that tell you where you are in space. And there's one more layer to all of this. Chemical analysis of ceramics found throughout the labyrinth's floors identified residues of mescaline, the active compound in the San Pedro cactus. Psychoactive substances were consumed inside the underground complex. This was no oversight. It was part of the design. There was also a ventilation system, shafts connecting all 3 floors to the exterior, keeping enough air circulating so the torches wouldn't go out and gathered crowds wouldn't suffocate. But inside the corridors, you don't feel the air moving. It's in constant motion, and you simply don't notice. That system still works today, with zero maintenance after 2,500 years. At the deepest point of the labyrinth, inside a cross-shaped chamber, stands a granite monolith, 15 feet tall, carved with the temple's central figure. It pierces the ceiling. Priests on the floor above could speak through that opening, and the voice would emerge below as if a god itself were speaking. Mainstream archaeology explains CHAVÍN de HUÁNTAR as the ceremonial hub of a religious movement that spread across much of Peru between 900 and 200 BC. The controlled experience of sound, darkness, psychoactive substances, and architectural disorientation, is understood as a sophisticated religious technology comparable to the initiation rituals of ancient Greece. That makes sense. But researcher Miriam Kohler went further and proposed that CHAVÍN represents what she calls total sensory technology, an environment built as an instrument where architecture, acoustics, chemistry, and psychology were integrated into a single, precisely engineered experience. This isn't mysticism, it's applied knowledge of the human nervous system, achieved 2,500 years before any scientific discipline existed to study it. The question isn't whether the priests of CHAVÍN knew what they were doing. The evidence makes it clear they did. What we can't answer is how they learned it, what they discovered across generations, and where that knowledge went when the labyrinth fell silent. And speaking of silence, and of places that guard even older secrets, our next stop is a Mediterranean island where the oldest temples in the entire world still stand, built by people who vanished without leaving a single written word. The Temples of ğANTIJA. You're on the island of Gozo, in the Maltese archipelago, in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's early morning, and the sun is still low. In front of you, rising from a limestone hill above the town of Zagra, there's a wall. It doesn't look like a ruin. It looks like something built yesterday by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The blocks are enormous, some over 20 feet tall and weighing up to 50 tons. You place your hand on the stone, and it's cold. Very cold. And as you stand there trying to grasp the scale of what you're seeing, a tour guide walks by and mentions that this place is 5,600 years old, that it's 1,000 years older than the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and that nobody knows who built it, because the people who raised these walls no longer exist. They left no descendants, no written language, nothing but these stones. The temples of ğANTIJA are the oldest freestanding stone structures in the entire world. That's not an opinion. It's what radiocarbon and thermoluminescence dating conducted by archaeologist David Trump confirmed, placing the construction of the Southern Temple between 3,600 and 3,200 BC. The temples follow a specific floor plan, two apsidal chambers arranged around a central corridor, creating a shape similar to a clover leaf. And that same layout repeats across roughly 30 Maltese temples from the same period, spread across the two islands of Malta and Gozo. This means there was a consistent architectural tradition, shared between islands, sustained for hundreds of years, by a people who never wrote a single word explaining what any of it meant. The nearest limestone quarry is approximately 500 meters from the temple. That sounds close, but we're talking about moving 50-ton blocks with no metal, no wheel, and no documented draft animals. Nobody has solved that problem satisfactorily to this day. And there's another detail most visitors miss. No residential structures from the same cultural period have ever been found near ğANTIJA or any other Maltese temple. The people who built and used these spaces apparently didn't live near them. Where they lived, how many there were, and how their daily lives were organized remains completely invisible to archaeology. We have the temples. We have the dead. We have almost nothing else. Researcher Rupert Till of the University of Huddersfield conducted acoustic analyses inside ğANTIJA's chambers and found resonance properties similar to those documented in other Maltese temples, standing wave frequencies in the low range, perceptible during any ritual activity inside the space. Whether that was the result of intentional acoustic engineering or a consistent consequence of the architectural form is a question that still hasn't been answered. And then comes the part that changes everything. In 2019, An ancient DNA study published with analysis of bones recovered from the Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta revealed something deeply unsettling. The genetic lineage of the people who built these temples does not continue in later Maltese populations. The Bronze Age people who inhabited Malta after approximately 2500 BC were genetically distinct from the temple builders. This was not a gradual transition, not assimilation. It was a complete population replacement. The temple people didn't slowly decline. They didn't blend with other groups. They simply vanished. And whatever caused that disappearance, whether displacement, disease, famine, or something else entirely, left no archaeological signature that allows us to identify what actually happened. Mainstream archaeology attributes the disappearance of this culture to a combination of resource depletion on a small island ecosystem, possible climate shifts in the early 3rd millennium BC, and population pressure from groups arriving from Sicily and the Italian peninsula. It's a reasonable model, consistent with patterns seen elsewhere in prehistoric Mediterranean. But the completeness of the rupture, genetic, cultural, architectural, and ritual all at once, with no hybrid phase, no transitional tradition, no evidence that any member of this culture survived long enough to pass on what they knew, is hard to fit into any simple explanation. Something ended all at once. And the local tradition of gozo, documented in fieldwork on Maltese village customs, predating modern tourism by centuries, records that the areas around ğANTIJA are avoided after dark. Farmers have reported recurring experiences near the temple that local tradition describes as contact with those still inside. The stones still stand, and what was done within them for 1,000 years by people who are now genetically extinct still has no name. From an island whose people vanished without a trace, our journey now moves to the other side of the world, to a valley in northern China, where someone, 4,300 years ago, decided to carve the sky itself into the earth. The Taosi Observatory. You're in a valley in northern China. The year is approximately 2300 BC. The pre-dawn air is cold and completely still. In front of you, rising from the ground in a wide arc, there's a rammed earth wall with 12 narrow openings cut into it, each one just wide enough to frame a single slice of the eastern horizon. You're standing at the fixed central point of the structure. You wait. And as the sun begins to climb above the hills, its first light passes through one specific opening, and only one, casting a precise beam onto the ground at your feet. Someone built this. Someone understood the sky well enough to encode it into the earth. And the oldest astronomical texts we know of in Chinese history wouldn't be written for another 2,000 years. The archaeological site of Taosi was identified by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences during regional surveys in 1978, and large-scale excavations began shortly after. For decades, it was understood as a major settlement from the late Longshan culture period, one of the largest of its time. Then, between 2003 and 2004, a team led by archaeologist He Nu of the Institute of Archaeology discovered something that completely reframed that picture. Beneath the outer edges of the settlement, they uncovered a semicircular rammed earth platform roughly 200 feet in diameter. Built into its inner wall were 12 trapezoidal slits, narrow openings spaced at precise intervals. An observer standing at a fixed central point inside the structure would see the sun rise through a different slit on each of 12 key calendar dates across a full solar year, including the summer and winter solstices, the spring and autumn equinoxes, and 8 intermediate dates between them. Astronomers Xiaochun's son and David Pankanier of Lehigh University subjected this discovery to rigorous computational testing using solar models corrected for the precession of the equinoxes as it stood around 2100 BC. They verified that the alignments of the slits corresponded to the proposed calendar dates within a margin of plus or minus 0.3 degrees of arc. That's not coincidence, that's engineering. The results were published in the journal Chinese Archaeology in 2004 and cited in the journal Antiquity in 2011. What makes this extraordinary is the timeline. The Taosi Observatory was built approximately 4,300 years ago. The Zhuangshu calendar, the oldest formally documented calendar system in Chinese history, dates to around 370 BC. That's a gap of nearly 2,000 years between the physical monument and the written tradition it supposedly preceded. The site itself was enormous by any standard of its time. The urban area of Taosi covered approximately 690 acres, making it one of the largest settlements anywhere in the 3rd millennium BC world. It contained differentiated residential zones, elite cemeteries, and craft production areas. The elite burials included some of the most richly adorned tombs ever discovered from that period in China. Taosi wasn't a village, it was a city, and it had an observatory. Excavations also recovered what may be the earliest known example of a written Chinese character, a red-painted inscription on a ceramic vessel that some researchers have provisionally identified as an ancestral form of a character linked to the legendary Emperor Yao. That identification remains contested, but if confirmed, it would push the origins of Chinese writing back more than 1,000 years beyond what is currently accepted. Mainstream archaeology interprets the Taosi Observatory as evidence that the late Longshan culture was significantly more sophisticated than previously recognized. A hierarchical proto-state in which specialist astronomers served a ruling class, using empirical solar observation to define a ceremonial and agricultural calendar. This interpretation connects naturally to later Chinese traditions that attribute calendar reforms to the legendary emperors Yao and Shun, both associated with the Shaanxi region, whose mythological reigns overlap with the Taosi period. In this reading, Taosi may be the historical core behind some of China's oldest founding legends. But if the astronomers of Taosi built a 12-division solar calendar in 2300 BC, they didn't invent it in a single generation. A calibrated observatory encodes accumulated knowledge. The positions of the slits had to be determined through years, perhaps decades, of prior systematic observation. That knowledge existed before the monument, and yet no physical evidence of it has been found. The knowledge simply appears, complete, expressed in 200 feet of rammed earth with 12 precisely angled slits. From a valley in northern China where the sky was mapped into the earth 4,000 years ago, our journey now crosses continents and oceans to Egypt, where something so ancient and so massive was raised beneath the ground that to this day nobody can explain who put it there. The Temple of Seti. You're in Egypt, 100 miles north of Luxor, in the desert of Abydos. The sun is already high, and the heat is dry and heavy. In front of you stands a temple that was already considered ancient when history's most famous pharaohs hadn't even been born yet. You walk through the main corridor, and the painted reliefs on the walls still carry their original colors after 3,200 years. Blue, red, gold. Perfect. You keep walking, pass through the halls, turn down a side corridor, and then the floor begins to slope downward. The temperature drops, the light fades, and you arrive at a structure that doesn't match anything you've just seen. The stone blocks here are monstrous. Some weigh between 50 and 100 tons. There's no mortar between them. And the feeling you get, standing in this place 20 meters below the floor of the temple above, is that this is far older than anything you've seen so far. The Temple of Seti, the first, is a masterpiece of the Egyptian New Kingdom. Its painted reliefs are considered among the finest ever produced in ancient Egypt. The temple contains the famous Abydos King list, a sequential carved record of 76 pharaohs stretching back to the beginnings of Egyptian civilization, one of only 3 canonical records of its kind to survive antiquity. It is a monument to institutional memory. But it was British archaeologist Flinders Petrie and his colleague Margaret Murray who, in 1902 and 1903, discovered behind and beneath that temple something that didn't fit the rest of the picture. Henri Frankfort of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago excavated the site more thoroughly between 1925 and 1930 and published his findings in 1933. What they found was the Osireion. The Osireion is a roofless, rectangular chamber built from monolithic granite and limestone blocks, some estimated to weigh between 50 and 100 tons, fitted together without mortar in a style that Frankfurt himself described, in his own words, as resembling the construction of Egypt's oldest monuments. It sits 20 meters below the floor level of Seti III's temple. When the Nile's annual flood raises the region's water table, it floods. That means it was either built at a time when the water table was significantly lower than it is today, or by people with the capacity to work 20 meters underground, manage water infiltration, and position 100-ton granite blocks inside a subterranean chamber with a precision that has kept those walls standing for however long they've been standing. The granite for the central platform and surrounding walls came from Aswan, 140 miles to 140 miles to the south. At the center of the structure, there's a raised rectangular island surrounded by a water channel, giving the entire structure the appearance of an island in an underground sea. In Egyptian cosmology, that configuration directly mirrors the primordial mound of creation rising from the waters of chaos. Frankfurt himself, writing in 1933, was careful but clear. He noted that the Osireion's architectural style was incompatible with the standard construction conventions of the 19th dynasty and more consistent with the monumental traditions of the Old Kingdom, or possibly earlier periods still. He attributed it to Seti, the first regardless, arguing that the king had consciously chosen an archasing style to emphasize the sacred antiquity of the site. But there's a problem with that explanation. Archasing architecture means reproducing the visual style of earlier buildings. It does not mean reverting to engineering methods involving 100-ton granite monoliths that no other construction project of the same period employed. Every other structure known to have been built by Seti III, the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, his mortuary temple at Kurna, uses the conventional New Kingdom approach of smaller, manageable stone blocks assembled in large numbers. The Osireion is different in kind, not just in style. Geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, who proposed an earlier construction date for the Great Sphinx based on water erosion patterns in its surrounding enclosure, also argued that the Osireion displays erosion profiles more consistent with a construction date significantly earlier than the New Kingdom period. Magnetometry surveys conducted by the University of Birmingham's Abydos project between 2014 and 2017 detected extensive subsurface anomalies in the area surrounding the Osireion, including what appears to be a large structure buried beneath the desert floor to the east of the temple that has yet to be excavated. What it is remains unknown. And the question Frankfurt raised in 1933, without ever fully answering, remains open. Was this built to look ancient, or was it already ancient before Seti II's builders ever arrived here? From an Egypt where something older than Egyptian civilization itself may still be waiting beneath the desert, our journey now returns to Malta. But this time, we don't stay on the surface. This time, we go down. Because the next place we're visiting was carved entirely below the ground, and what happened inside it was designed to permanently change whoever entered. The Saflieni Hypogeum. You're in Paola, a busy, house-filled town on the island of Malta. The streets are narrow, neighbors chat through windows, and children play on the sidewalks. Nothing here seems out of the ordinary. But in 1902, workers digging a cistern beneath a new building block broke through the floor and found darkness on the other side. A lantern was lowered down, and below them, carved into solid limestone descending 3 stories into the earth, was a temple that had been sealed for approximately 4,000 years. You descend the entrance staircase, and the air changes immediately. It becomes cooler, heavier, quieter. The sound of the city above vanishes completely, and as your eyes adjust to the dim light, you begin to grasp the scale of what was carved here, not with machines, not with metal, but with stone tools and deer antlers, by hands that did this in the dark, more than 5,000 years ago. The Saflieni Hypogeum descends through 3 levels. The upper level dates to approximately 3,600 to 3,300 BC. The middle level, the most architecturally refined, dates to 3,300 to 3,000 BC. The lower level, the deepest and most restricted, dates to 3,150 to 2,500 BC. Together, they encompass 5,000 square feet of carved space. The vaulted ceilings of the middle level precisely reproduce the architectural forms of Malta's above-ground temples, like ḻAGANTIJA, which you already know. That means whoever carved this space was deliberately modeling an underground world after what existed above, or modeling what existed above after what was already below. Thermoluminescence dating of ceramic fragments from sealed deposits in the lower level, conducted by the University of Malta in 2019, confirmed activity dates between 3,100 and 2,900 BC for the deepest chambers. That places the oldest parts of this complex at over 5,000 years of age. And inside those chambers, archaeologists found the remains of approximately 7,000 human beings. 7,000 people. The bones of an entire city gathered in an underground space the size of a large house, over more than 1,000 years. These people were brought here deliberately and deposited with intent. None of them showed signs of violent trauma, consistent with ritual or ceremonial deposition, not mass burial following a catastrophe. And then, on the middle level, there is a chamber known as the Oracle Room. It's a room roughly 13 feet by 13 feet, with a ceiling about 10 feet high. There's a niche carved into one of the walls, approximately 3 feet wide and 1.5 feet tall. When a deep male voice speaks inside that niche, the sound resonates throughout the entire complex simultaneously. And regardless of what tone is introduced into the room, the space resonates at exactly 110 Hz. Not an approximate range, a specific frequency. Acoustic measurements by Robert John of Princeton University's Peer Laboratory and Igor Reznikov of the University of Paris-Thix confirmed this resonance in work conducted during the 1990s. Neuroscientist Ian Cook of UCLA published findings in 2008, documenting that 110 Hz is a frequency associated with suppression of activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational analysis and self-monitoring, and with increased activity in the limbic system, the region associated with emotion, instinct, and altered states of experience. A room tuned to 110 Hz suppresses the thinking mind and opens whatever lies beneath it. To produce a consistent resonance of exactly 110 Hz, the dimensions of the oracle room must be precisely specific to generate that frequency. The room has exactly those dimensions. Either that is a coincidence so precisely specified that it stretches the word coincidence beyond any usefulness, or someone in 3000 BC carved a room for that frequency, which means they knew exactly what frequency they wanted before they began carving, which means they had reasons to want it. The civilization that built the Hypogeum, the same people responsible for the ğANTIJA temples in Gozo, vanished completely around 2500 BC, with the complete genetic discontinuity confirmed by the 2019 ancient DNA study. They left the Hypogeum, the ğANTIJA temples, and approximately 30 other stone temples scattered across Malta and Gozo. They left 7,000 dead in an underground room tuned to alter consciousness. They left no written language. They left no descendants. They left stones, and they left a question that becomes more specific the more carefully you look at it. If you know the frequency that suppresses rational thought, and you know how to carve a room that produces it, and you use that room for 1,000 years to guide thousands of human beings through an experience designed to open something in the mind, what exactly are you trying to open? And what do you do with what comes out? That question has no answer. At least, not yet. And from an underground temple in Malta that still resonates at 1 to 10 Hz to this day, our journey makes its final stop on the other side of the world, in India, where an entire mountain was removed to reveal something that should not have been humanly possible to create. The Kailasa Temple. You're now in Maharashtra, on the central plateau of India. The sun beats down hard, and the air smells of hot stone. In front of you stands a solid basalt cliff face, 65 feet tall. But you're not looking at a cliff. You're looking at a temple, a tower rising 107 feet, courtyards, pavilions, staircases, life-size elephants carved in relief supporting the walls, panels depicting battles and gods, all of it made from a single continuous block of rock. It wasn't built upward, brick by brick, like every temple you've ever seen. It was revealed from the top down, like a sculpture, removing everything that wasn't the temple and leaving only what was. You step back, trying to take in the scale of what you're seeing, and realize you can't. Because what stands before you is twice the size of the Parthenon in Athens, and it was made from a single stone. The Kailasa Temple, catalogued as Cave 16 in the Ellora complex in Maharashtra, was never lost or forgotten. It has been a site of continuous worship since its construction. Inscriptions on copper plates attribute its dedication to Rashtrakuta king Krishna III, who reigned from approximately 756 to 773 AD. The conventional timeline for the main construction phase is roughly 18 years. Now, for the numbers. The main tower rises 107 feet. The total complex measures roughly 276 feet long by 154 feet wide, approximately twice the footprint of the Parthenon, carved 3 times deeper into the rock. The basalt of the Ellora Plateau registers between 6 and 7 on the Mohs hardness scale, comparable in cutting difficulty to steel. And to reveal this temple from the mountain, approximately 400,000 tons of basalt had to be removed. 400,000 tons. Add to that the fact that the cutting sequence was strictly top-down, meaning workers had no ground beneath them as they worked, suspended by ropes and scaffolding anchored above while carving downward. Scholar Percy Brown analyzed chisel marks and scaffolding sockets in his work, published in 1942, and confirmed that top-down cutting sequence. No contemporary account exists describing how that method was actually carried out. The labor calculations have been addressed by multiple researchers over the centuries. 19th century estimates suggested that removing 400,000 tons of rock with iron chisels and wooden mallets under optimized continuous labor would require something on the order of 7,000 workers operating 12 hours a day for 150 years. Krishna Tharan's inscribed reign lasted 17 years, and the dedication inscription doesn't describe the construction. It records that the temple was given, that a finished thing was presented, without explaining how it came to exist. An account preserved in later Sanskrit texts describes the architect Kailasa standing before the completed structure and saying, "How was this done? Even I, who built it, cannot understand." Now comes the detail that nobody can explain, and that mainstream archaeology openly acknowledges as an unsolved problem. The 400,000 tons of basalt removed from the mountain had to go somewhere. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the Archaeological Survey of India in the early 2000s found no significant rubble deposits beneath the courtyard or on the surrounding slopes. The material is not below the surface. A 2019 photogrammetric survey that captured the site with extraordinary precision also produced no answer as to where the material went. 400,000 tons of basaltic rock, removed from a mountain in the middle of an inhabited agricultural region, with no corresponding rubble field identified anywhere in the surrounding area. That is not a minor detail. It is a logistical impossibility that is simply left open. Mainstream archaeology presents the Kailasa temple as the pinnacle of the Deccan rock-cut architectural tradition, an extraordinary achievement of organized religious devotion and royal patronage. The Rashtrakuta dynasty was a sophisticated imperial state with the administrative capacity to mobilize enormous workforces. The copper inscriptions are taken as sufficient attribution. The missing rubble is acknowledged as intriguing, but not treated as something that invalidates the explanation. But there is one observation that the conventional position doesn't fully answer. Every other rock-cut temple at Ellora represents a clear progression of growing skill and ambition. The earlier ones are simpler. The later ones are more elaborate. And then there is Kailasa, which doesn't fit at the end of that progression the way a culmination should. It isn't incrementally more complex than what came before. It is different in kind, in scale, and in method. Structural engineer Bhaktavatsala Parathi, who published detailed analyses of tool mark patterns at Ellora, raised the question of whether Kailasa's top-down removal sequence, the absence of any traceable rubble, and its qualitative discontinuity from the surrounding temples might be better explained by a different origin model than the one currently accepted, possibly the renovation or completion of a structure that already partially existed, retroactively claimed by a king who found it and finished it. Perhaps we will never know. But the temple is still there. The rubble is still missing. The question is still open. And you are standing before a mountain that was transformed into a temple, or a temple that was always inside the mountain, waiting for someone who knew exactly where to begin cutting. We explored 6 places, 6 temples, 6 gaps between what the physical evidence demands and what the historical record offers, and in every single one of them, the same question. What kind of humans did this? How did they do it? What did they know? And where did that knowledge go? Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 6 places left you without an answer? Tell me in the comments which one shook you the most, and which one you already knew about before watching this video. And if you made it this far and still haven't hit, like, now is the time, Leave your like. Every click tells me it was worth it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because the next video is already being built, and it's going to take you to places you can't even imagine yet. The past is not behind us. It is beneath our feet, inside the mountains, at the bottom of the seas, hidden in the forests, concealed, in silence, waiting for someone curious and brave enough to investigate what's really there and reveal the truth to everyone. Thank you for exploring with me once again. I'm Curious Chris, and I'll be waiting for you on the next adventure. Until the next exploration.